Hello there. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about the life of a Viking, but not the kind you see in movies. Not the kind swinging swords or raiding distant lands. Nope. Today we're talking about the quiet Vikings, the farmers, the ones who stayed home, the ones who woke up before sunrise, fed animals, worked the land, and tried to keep their families alive through cold winters and short summers. Most people think Vikings equals warriors, but that's just part of the story. Most Vikings never set foot on a longship. Most Vikings never fought in battle. Most Vikings were ordinary people. And those ordinary people, they ran the world while the raiders got all the headlines. Without farmers, there would be no ships full of warriors. Just a lot of very hangry Vikings wandering the fjords. Historians think less than 10% of Vikings ever went on raids. Most were farmers, craftsmen, fishermen, regular village folk. So next time you imagine a Viking, maybe picture them with a plow, not a sword. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine a longhouse at dawn. Smoke curling from the chimney. The smell of fresh hay and wet earth. Chickens scratching the ground. Cows lowing softly. The faint sound of water from a nearby stream. That's life for a Viking farmer. Not flashy, not heroic in movies, but steady and important. Life on the farm followed the seasons. Spring meant plowing and sowing. Summer meant harvesting and storing food. Autumn brought preparation for the long, cold winter. And winter was quiet. Long nights by the hearth, storytelling, weaving, repairing tools. It wasn't easy. Frost could kill crops. Disease could wipe out animals. Storms could ruin months of work in hours. But the Viking farmer adapted. They learned patience, resilience, and how to survive with what the land gave them. Some Viking farms were passed down for generations. Archaeologists have found evidence of longhouses standing in the same place for hundreds of years. Imagine that. Families working the same soil, raising the same animals while the world outside changed slowly or sometimes violently. And yes, sometimes the farmer probably wanted to swing a sword too. But mostly swinging a plow was more useful. And honestly, probably less dangerous. Picture this. A farmer tossing hay to the cows, feeling the rough fibers scrape their hands. A woman stirring a pot of porridge over the fire, steam curling into the smoky air. Children running barefoot on damp soil, chasing chickens or helping gather vegetables. The smell of fresh bread baking. The sound of axes chopping wood. The warmth of a small fire on a cold morning. This was daily life. Ordinary but alive. And that's the thing. While movies and history books sometimes focus on battles and raids, life for the average Viking was full of small victories. A good harvest. Healthy animals. A roof that didn't leak in the rain. A child learning to weave or plow. That was real heroism. Over the next chapters, we'll walk through a year in the life of a Viking farmer. From early spring planting to winter nights by the fire. From the sounds of animals in the barn to the smells of smoked meat and fresh bread. From the laughter of children to the quiet moments of reflection under the stars. We'll see how men and women shared work. How children learned life skills. How families survived storms, crop failures, and cold winters. And how they celebrated the small joys along the way. Even though farmers were ordinary, they were skilled. Archaeologists have found tools, jewelry, and everyday items that show Viking farmers were clever, creative, and connected to trade networks far beyond their villages. So while they didn't raid, they were far from simple. And if you think life was boring, well, maybe for a Hollywood blockbuster. But imagine sneaking into a field at dawn and watching the sun rise over a misty valley. Listening to the first birds of the morning. Smelling the damp earth. Feeling the crisp chill of early spring. That's the quiet beauty of a Viking farm. By the end of this journey, maybe you'll see Vikings differently. Not just as raiders, but as people. Ordinary, patient, creative, and surprisingly tough. People whose days were full of small victories, hard work, and moments of simple joy. So settle in. Take a deep breath. Let's leave the horned helmets and swords behind for a while and step into a world of long houses, fields, animals, and the calm rhythm of farm life. Welcome to the life of the Viking farmer. Chapter 2: The Viking Homeland. Before stepping fully into the daily life of a Viking farmer, it's important to understand the land itself. Where you live shapes who you are. And the Viking farmers lived in a land that could be beautiful, harsh, and unforgiving all at once. Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. Rocky coasts, deep fjords, endless forests, rolling hills, and fields that were small but precious. Winters were long and cold. Summers were short. Weather could change without warning. One day the sun would shine, the next a storm could sweep across the land, turning roads into mud and rivers into angry torrents. Life here demanded patience. Hard work wasn't enough. It had to be careful work. Every choice mattered. A poorly stored grain or a small miscalculation in planting could mean an empty winter. And winter in Scandinavia could be cruel. Snow covered fields for months. Frost bit through clothes and walls. Food became scarce. Families had to prepare long before the first snow fell. The land itself shaped the Viking farmer's home. Longhouses were built with wood from nearby forests, walls made of logs or woven branches plastered with mud. Roofs were covered with thatch or turf, heavy to hold insulation against the cold. Inside, the longhouse was warm and communal. The fire was the heart of the home. Smoke curled through a hole in the roof. Everyone shared the space. Sleeping, cooking, working, weaving, storytelling. Privacy was rare, but warmth and community were constant. Fields were often small patches carved out of forests or rocky soil. Every inch mattered. Crops like barley, oats, and rye were common. Tiny vegetable gardens supplied onions, cabbage, and beans. Farmers rotated crops, planned for bad weather, and made the most of whatever fertile soil they had. Livestock roamed nearby. Cows, sheep, goats, and pigs provided milk, meat, wool, and leather. Chickens scratched for insects. Bees provided honey. Animals weren't just food, they were survival. A dead cow could ruin a family. A stolen pig could ruin a season. Forests weren't just obstacles. They were resources. Wood for building, fire, tools, and furniture. Berries, mushrooms, herbs, and wild game for food. Rivers provided fish and fresh water. The land was generous if treated wisely, unforgiving if ignored. Seasons dictated life. Spring meant thawing ground and early planting. Farmers plowed carefully with wooden plows tipped with iron, sowing seeds in neat rows. Summer brought work in the sun, tending crops, repairing fences, feeding animals, and sometimes laughing as children chased chickens or stumbled in muddy fields. Autumn meant harvest, storing food, and preparing for winter. Winter brought rest but also vigilance. Fires were kept burning, supplies counted, tools repaired. Storms could trap people inside for days. Food had to last, warmth was precious. Neighbors mattered. Villages were small clusters of farms. People relied on each other. If someone fell ill, others helped. If a roof leaked, neighbors offered tools or hands. Markets and fairs connected farmers to craftsmen and traders. Even a quiet Viking farm wasn't completely isolated. Land wasn't just survival, it was identity. Names of farms often lasted centuries, passed down through families. Families stayed on the same soil, grew the same crops, raised the same animals while the world outside slowly changed. The connection to land created patience, resilience, and a quiet pride. Some forests were dangerous. Wolves, bears, and lynxes roamed in the shadows. Farmers had to be careful, especially with animals. A careless step could mean a lost lamb or an injured child. Yet the wild also provided wood for tools, mushrooms and berries for meals, fish from rivers. Life was a constant negotiation with nature. Respect it, survive. Ignore it, and face consequences. Weather shaped not only work but mood. Spring brought hope, summer energy, autumn satisfaction, winter reflection. Snow blanketing the fields made everything quiet. Fires inside longhouses crackled. Families shared stories, sang songs, and sometimes argued about who chopped too little wood. Winter nights were long, but they offered stillness. Farmers watched the stars, listened to the wind in the pines, and waited for spring again. Despite all the hardships, the Viking homeland had its beauty. Mist over fjords at dawn, sunlight dancing on river water, wildflowers in tiny meadows, the smell of wet soil after a rain, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Life was hard, but it was alive. And even if they didn't sail or raid, Viking farmers were never boring. Every day brought a challenge. Every season demanded decisions. Every storm tested skill and patience. And through it all, they found moments of joy, laughter of children, first milk from a cow, the smell of bread baking, a quiet sunset over the hills. The land shaped the Viking farmer. The land gave life, lessons, and stories. Understanding it is the first step to understanding the people who lived here. They weren't just surviving. They were working with the rhythm of the earth, learning its secrets, and building a life that would last long after they were gone. And in that slow, patient life, we can see the quiet courage of ordinary Vikings. Not in battles, not in raids, but in the steady rhythm of planting, harvesting, tending, and enduring. Chapter 3: The Viking Farmstead. The Viking farm was more than just a place to grow food. It was a home, a workplace, a school, a workshop, and a fortress all in one. Every element mattered because survival depended on it. The longhouse, the fields, the barns, the animal pens, they were all connected. Life flowed between them like a quiet rhythm, and the people who lived there moved with it naturally. The longhouse was the center, long and narrow, made of timber and stone, with walls plastered with mud or wattle, and a roof heavy with thatch or turf. The roof was steep, letting snow slide off in winter. The interior was simple, but everything had a purpose. There was one main fire in the center, surrounded by stones. Smoke drifted slowly through a hole at the top, curling toward the roof beams. It smelled of burning wood and sometimes of herbs hanging to dry. That fire was the heart of the longhouse. It provided warmth, light, and a place to cook. People gathered around it for meals, for work, for storytelling, and for warmth on freezing nights. Sleeping arrangements were communal. Beds were wooden frames with straw or reeds, covered in animal skins. Families slept together, and sometimes visitors or traveling relatives shared the space. Privacy was rare, but comfort came from being close. The firelight flickering on the walls created shadows that danced across carved wooden posts. Those carvings sometimes told stories or marked family symbols. Every detail of the longhouse was intentional, designed for survival and subtle beauty. Outside the longhouse were the barns and animal pens. Sheep, goats, and pigs were kept close to the house, especially in winter. Cows had slightly larger shelters, and chickens roamed freely in fenced areas. The smells of hay, animal hair, and manure mingled, sometimes unpleasant, sometimes comforting. The farmers knew these smells as much as the warmth of the hearth or the sound of wind through the pine trees. Animals weren't just food. They were part of the family's life. Each cow, sheep, or pig represented hours of work, and losing one could mean disaster. The fields were often small and scattered, carved from forests or rocky soil. Every patch of fertile ground was precious. Farmers rotated crops to avoid exhausting the soil. Barley, oats, and rye were staples, and vegetables like onions, cabbage, and beans were grown in small garden plots. Planting was careful work, and timing was critical. A late frost could ruin the early crops, and pests could destroy months of labor in days. Farmers learned the land intimately. They knew where water pooled, which soil held warmth, and how to read the clouds. They understood nature's subtle signals better than anyone. Tools were essential. Wooden plows tipped with iron for the fields, sickles for harvesting, hoes for small gardens, hammers and axes for construction. Every tool had its place and was maintained carefully. Blacksmiths in nearby villages often repaired or made new tools, but a farmer also had to know basic repairs. Broken tools could slow work and risk survival. Farmers also made smaller items themselves: baskets, ropes, simple furniture. Creativity was survival. Water was precious. Streams or wells provided drinking water for the family and animals. Farmers sometimes dug small channels to irrigate fields or manage rainwater. Fishing in nearby rivers supplemented food and offered small trade goods. Even the smallest stream could be life-saving in a hot summer or dry season. Fences and barriers were practical and symbolic. They protected crops from animals, kept livestock contained, and sometimes marked boundaries with neighbors. Farmers had to defend their property not only from animals but occasionally from thieves or raiders. Most Viking raids didn't reach inland farms, but stories of attacks lingered. Tools and weapons might be kept close by, not for glory, but for protection. A pitchfork could become a spear if needed, and a carefully sharpened axe was a farmer's friend. Gardens were small sanctuaries of life. Herbs were grown for medicine and cooking, flowers for decoration or ritual. Children learned by helping in the garden, noticing which plants grew best, how to harvest seeds, how to store roots and herbs for winter. Even small acts, watering, weeding, collecting berries, were lessons in responsibility and patience. Seasonal changes shaped the rhythm of the farmstead. Spring mornings began early. Farmers dragged plows through still-cold soil. Animals were tended before breakfast, and children helped gather kindling. Summer was full of work: tending crops, mending roofs, carrying water, storing hay. Autumn was harvest season, often the busiest time. Grain was cut with sickles, dried, and stored in barns. Vegetables were preserved by salting, drying, or fermenting. Winter slowed everything. Days were short, nights long. Families worked on crafts indoors, making clothing, repairing tools, carving wood, or weaving baskets. The Viking farmstead was also a place of stories. While work dominated, storytelling was a natural part of life. Around the fire at night, elders recounted legends, family history, and clever tricks to survive the harsh land. Humor was common. Jokes about stubborn oxen, mischievous children, or lost tools were shared softly so as not to wake the youngest. Stories preserved knowledge, taught lessons, and brought warmth and connection. Even with hard work, there was room for quiet joy. A child's laughter chasing chickens, the first green shoots of barley in spring, the smell of bread baking, or the sight of snow falling softly across the roof. Those small moments made life rich. Farmers weren't famous, but they experienced life fully, noticing details that warriors on longships often missed. Farms could be self-sufficient, but trade and cooperation mattered. Neighbors helped during planting and harvest, exchanged tools or seeds, and occasionally gathered for small fairs or religious festivals. Even in remote areas, communities were connected by paths through forests and rivers. Social bonds were essential for survival, and the farmstead was the center of both family life and community life. Every aspect of the farm reflected balance: work and rest, survival and creativity, caution and joy. A Viking farmer lived close to the land, aware of every smell, sound, and texture. The soil beneath the fingers, the hay under the feet, the warmth of the fire, the cool water from the stream, all part of a life lived in rhythm with nature. Even without battles or raids, life on the farm demanded courage. It demanded patience, skill, and endurance. Losing a crop, an animal, or a tool could mean hardship. Winter's cold tested clothing and shelter. Storms tested roofs and fences. Yet every year, the land offered rewards: food, warmth, and the satisfaction of a season well tended. The Viking farmstead was ordinary, yet extraordinary. It taught resilience, creativity, and humility. It nurtured families, connected communities, and shaped the lives of people who built their world slowly, carefully, and quietly. And in every sound, the creak of timber, the lowing of cows, the chopping of wood, there was life, rhythm, and subtle beauty. Life on a Viking farmstead wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and in its quiet, persistent way, it was heroic. Chapter 4: Daily Life and Routine. Life on a Viking farm moved slowly but never stopped. Every day followed a rhythm, set by the sun, the seasons, and the needs of the land and animals. There were no alarm clocks, no offices, no schedules dictated by someone else. Nature decided the pace, and the farmers learned to listen. Mornings began early, often before the first light touched the sky. The air was cold, sometimes damp with frost. Farmers stretched their stiff muscles, pulled on woolen clothes, and stepped onto the rough wooden floor of the longhouse. The fire, already smoldering from the night, gave off warmth and the faint smell of smoke. Children yawned and rubbed their eyes. Animals stirred, sensing movement and the promise of food. Chickens clucked and scratched. Cows lowed softly. Pigs snuffled at their pens. The first task was always tending the animals. Milk the cows, feed the pigs, let the chickens out to peck at the ground. Every animal mattered. A cow produced milk for the family. A sheep gave wool for clothing. A pig was a source of meat. One mistake could cost the family dearly. Yet these chores were familiar, almost soothing. The sound of cows chewing, the smell of hay, the soft clucking of hens. These became the heartbeat of the morning. Breakfast was simple but hearty. Porridge made from oats or barley, sometimes sweetened with honey or berries. Bread baked the day before. Cheese or butter if the animals had been generous. Families ate together, passing bowls, telling stories, laughing at small mishaps, like a child spilling porridge or a chicken darting across the table. Humor was part of survival. It made the hard work lighter and the long days easier to face. After breakfast, the day split into tasks according to the season. In spring, it was plowing fields, sowing seeds, repairing fences, and clearing stones. Wooden plows tipped with iron-dug furrows while farmers guided oxen through soil still cold from the winter. Children helped by carrying seeds or small tools, learning the ways of the land through hands-on experience. Their laughter sometimes mixed with the creak of the plow or the lowing of the oxen. Summer meant tending crops, repairing roofs, weaving baskets, and storing hay. The sun was high, the days long, and the work never-ending. Sweat ran down faces, dirt rubbed into skin, but the fields promised life. Grains grew taller, vegetables ripened, animals fattened. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing progress, knowing that careful effort today would feed the family tomorrow. Autumn was harvest time. It was the busiest, most critical season. Grain was cut with sickles, tied into bundles and stacked in barns. Vegetables were dug up, preserved with salt or smoke, or stored in cool cellars. Animals were fed extra to prepare for winter. Every action had weight. One mistake could mean hunger during the cold months. But there were moments of joy too. Children ran through golden fields, chasing each other or teasing chickens. Adults shared stories about previous harvests or joked about stubborn oxen. Humor was still alive even under pressure. Winter brought quiet work and reflection. The days were short, often dark. Snow covered fields, making plowing impossible, but there were still chores. Animals needed food and warmth. Roofs and walls were repaired. Tools were sharpened, baskets woven, and wool spun. Families gathered around the fire in the longhouse. Smoke curled toward the roof, carrying the smell of burning wood and drying herbs. Storytelling filled the room. Tales of clever farmers, mischievous animals, distant relatives, and legendary heroes. Even when the cold pressed against the walls, life continued inside. Children learned by doing. They didn't go to schools, but they absorbed knowledge from every task. How to carry water, how to milk a cow, how to spot a weak plant or a sick animal. They learned patience, observation, and responsibility. Games sometimes disguised lessons. Chasing chickens taught speed and agility. Carrying baskets taught balance. Helping with firewood taught carefulness. Lessons were woven into daily life. The day's rhythm was also marked by meals. Breakfast simple but filling. A midday meal of bread, cheese, or porridge. Dinner, often the largest meal with meat, fish, vegetables, and bread. Families ate together, shared news, told stories. Sometimes they sang quietly or hummed to keep spirits high. Food was not just sustenance, it was part of connection, of keeping family and tradition alive. Humor was small but constant. A goat might knock over a basket of apples. A child could trip on the rough wooden floor. A chicken might chase the dog. Farmers laughed, shook their heads, and went on. Life was serious, but laughter was the thread that kept it bearable. Even small jokes, whispered in the quiet of the longhouse, reminded people they were alive. The workday ended as the sun sank low. Shadows stretched across fields, smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, and animals settled in their pens. Families gathered near the fire. Some mended tools, some wove cloth, some told stories of past seasons. The air smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and the faint tang of animal fur. Evenings were calm, reflective, sometimes full of gentle humor as children mimicked their parents or recounted small adventures of the day. Farms were self-sufficient, but farmers relied on neighbors too. Help during harvests, shared tools, news about weather or crop success. Trade was small but important. Salt, honey, wool, or pottery might be exchanged. Connections extended beyond the farm into the wider community. Life was not isolated, even in the quiet countryside. Every day followed a pattern, but each day brought new challenges. Storms could delay work. Illness could strike. Animals could get sick or wander off. Crops could fail. The land demanded respect and vigilance. And yet, within these routines, farmers found moments of beauty. Sunrise over the fields, the smell of bread baking, a child laughing, a cow's soft lowing, a cold wind rustling pine trees. Small, ordinary moments that made life rich. Even without raiding or conquest, a Viking farmer's life required courage. Patience, skill, and endurance were their weapons. Each day tested them, and each season was a battle in its own quiet way. But through it all, farmers thrived, finding joy in simple victories, pride in work done well, and comfort in family and community. The rhythm of daily life on a Viking farm was not glamorous, but it was meaningful. Every chore, every meal, every story woven by the fire, every season endured. It all created a world full of life, learning, and quiet resilience. The ordinary tasks were heroic in their persistence. And through this steady routine, the Viking farmers shaped their world, leaving traces of their lives that last far beyond the longhouses and fields they tended. Chapter 5: The Role of Men and Women. Life on a Viking farm depended on everyone working together. Men, women, and children all had roles that mattered. Survival wasn't easy, and every pair of hands counted. But these roles weren't just about work. They shaped family, community, and the rhythm of daily life. Men usually handled the heaviest labor. They plowed the fields with oxen, built and repaired longhouses, barns and fences, chopped firewood, and tended large livestock like cows and horses. Their days started early and ended late. Sweat, dirt, and sore muscles were part of the routine. But work wasn't endless drudgery. Farmers often joked as they worked. A stubborn ox or a crooked fence post could spark laughter, sometimes at the farmer's own expense. Humor made the work lighter. Hunting and fishing were often men's tasks too. Rivers and forests provided fish, deer, and small game. A well-caught fish meant food and sometimes trade goods. Hunting required patience and knowledge of the land. Men learned to read tracks, listen for distant sounds, and move quietly through forests. Success was rewarded with food and pride. Failure meant improvising. And sometimes, animals won the day. An escaped deer or a clever fox would leave a man shaking his head and smiling. Women's work was just as crucial, though often less visible in stories about Vikings. Women cooked meals, prepared food for storage, spun wool, wove cloth, and made clothing. They tended gardens, milked animals, and sometimes managed trade when men were away or busy. Women were the keepers of the longhouse. They maintained order, ensured warmth, fed the family, and cared for children. Their work required skill, attention, and creativity. Cooking was not just mixing ingredients. It was preserving food for months, using smoke, salt, and fermentation. A good cook could stretch a small harvest into weeks of meals. Bread baked over the fire, porridge thick and nourishing, smoked meat hanging from beams. All depended on knowledge passed down through generations. Mistakes could lead to hunger, but skill brought security and comfort. Women also cared for health. They prepared herbal remedies for minor injuries or illnesses. They knew which plants could heal, which roots could soothe, and which leaves could help a fever. Their knowledge was practical and invaluable. Children learned from both men and women. Boys helped plow, carry water, or tend animals, but they also learned cooking, sewing, and weaving. Girls learned both domestic tasks and agricultural skills. Everyone was trained for survival. Play and work blended together. Chasing chickens, carrying baskets, or helping in the garden taught practical lessons. Every small task prepared them for adult life. Evenings brought shared responsibilities. Men and women worked together to repair tools, prepare food, or weave baskets. Stories were told while hands moved rhythmically. Humor was constant, sometimes teasing a child for spilling milk, or joking about a clumsy goat knocking over a bucket. Work and laughter were intertwined. Men and women also shared decision-making, planning the planting schedule, deciding which animals to breed, or preparing for winter required discussion and cooperation. Families depended on everyone's insight. Authority wasn't always formal. Respect and experience mattered most. A woman who knew crops or herbs could guide the family as much as a man who knew plows or fences. Seasonal work demanded flexibility. Men might help with indoor tasks in winter. Women might assist with heavy lifting in harvest. Everyone adjusted as needed. No one was idle. Every task was connected. Cooking depended on food grown. Repairs depended on tools made. Warmth depended on firewood chopped. Work was a chain linking everyone together. Beyond survival, roles shaped identity. Men took pride in strength, skill, and ability to provide. Women took pride in household mastery, knowledge of herbs and crafts, and raising children. Children learned both sides, preparing for the adult world. Humor, small competitions, and daily stories created pride and connection. Even ordinary tasks held subtle adventure. Herding animals meant watching for predators or thieves. Repairing fences in wind or rain tested endurance. Harvesting crops before frost required careful timing. Every day brought challenges, small victories, and the occasional minor disaster. An escaped pig, a broken plow, a spilled bucket of milk. But the family met them together. Life was full, demanding, and alive. Gender roles weren't rigid prisons. Adaptability was key. Some women led farms entirely, especially if men were away on trade or raiding expeditions. They managed animals, crops, and household affairs alone, proving skill and leadership. Stories exist of clever, resourceful women keeping farms running through storms, crop failures, and family emergencies. Humor and lightness were part of the balance. A stubborn ox might inspire jokes. Children's antics brought smiles. A spilled pail of water might provoke laughter instead of anger. Humor softened the harshness of work and made long days bearable. Even in a demanding life, joy found its way into routine. Men and women also participated in religious and cultural rituals. Seasonal celebrations, offerings to gods for harvest and livestock, and quiet prayers for protection. Work and belief were intertwined. A blessing on the fields, a small ritual by the fire, or a festival after harvest strengthened community and family ties. Every day ended with reflection. Families gathered near the fire. Children were tucked into straw beds. The longhouse smelled of smoke, wood, and herbs. Men and women shared the day's news, minor triumphs, and plans for tomorrow. Work paused. Stories and laughter filled the air. Even in exhaustion, there was contentment. Life was hard, but it was shared. Men and women on Viking farms were partners in survival. Their roles complemented each other. Their cooperation created rhythm, stability, and resilience. The balance of work, care, learning, and humor made life meaningful. They weren't famous warriors, but they were heroes in their own quiet way, keeping families alive, maintaining communities, and respecting the land that sustained them. Even now, centuries later, we can imagine the warmth of a longhouse fire, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of animals in the pen, the laughter of children. Men and women working side by side, sometimes teasing, sometimes instructing, always surviving together. Their lives remind us that heroism doesn't need a sword. It can be steady hands, shared effort, and quiet resilience. And in every chore, every shared story, every meal prepared and eaten, the Viking farmer's world comes alive. A world shaped by cooperation, skill, patience, and the small joys hidden in hard work. Chapter 6. Children and Education. Children on a Viking farm were everywhere, running through fields, chasing chickens, carrying baskets, helping with chores. Their lives blended work, play, and learning, often all at once. There were no schools with desks or blackboards. Every task was a lesson, every mistake a way to understand the world. Boys and girls learned through participation. Boys might help plow fields, guide oxen, and check soil. Girls might carry water, milk animals, or weave baskets. But these roles weren't strict. Ability mattered more than gender. A girl could learn to use a small plow. A boy might help prepare food or mend clothing. Every skill was important for survival. Mornings often began with small, simple tasks. Children fed chickens, collected eggs, or carried water. These chores had real consequences. Forget to feed the chickens and eggs would be lost. Carry too little water and cooking slowed. The lessons were immediate and practical. Slowly, children learned responsibility through doing. Work and play blended together. A child chasing a runaway goat practiced agility and quick thinking. Picking berries in the forest taught patience and knowledge of plants. Small competitions, who could carry a basket fastest, who could weave the neatest, mixed laughter with learning. Mistakes were part of the lesson, not reasons for punishment. Spilled milk or broken tools might spark teasing, followed by a gentle demonstration of the right way. Humor helped children absorb the lessons without fear. Observation was another way children learned. Watching older family members, they noticed the signs of the seasons, the health of animals, and the ripeness of crops. Nature was their teacher. They learned to read the clouds, the wind, and the soil. Red sky at night meant weather would be fair. An early frost meant harvest needed urgency. A sick cow or goat signaled attention. Children learned to read subtle signs that determined survival. Storytelling played a huge role in education. While families worked, elders told tales that were part lesson, part entertainment. Stories of clever farmers, resourceful women, and mischievous animals taught strategy, problem-solving, and creativity. Humor softened the lessons. A tale about a clumsy goat or a clever fox made children laugh while learning to pay attention. Through stories, children absorbed history, culture, and practical knowledge. Crafts were another classroom. Children learned weaving, spinning wool, sewing, repairing baskets, and making simple tools. These skills weren't just practical, they were necessary. A torn cloak in winter could mean frostbite. A broken basket could ruin stored food. Completing a woven mat or mended shoe taught patience, precision, and pride. Every task, no matter how small, mattered. Food preparation was a major part of learning. Children helped bake bread, churn butter, make porridge, or preserve vegetables and meat. Cooking taught timing, attention, and care. Burn the bread, and the lesson was learned for next time. Mistakes were normal, and humor made them less stressful. A spilled bucket of milk or mismeasured flour often ended in laughter and correction, not anger. Animal care was both work and school. Children learned to herd, feed, and watch animals for signs of sickness. Each cow, sheep, or pig mattered. Losing one could mean weeks of hardship. Children developed empathy, responsibility, and problem-solving as they cared for living creatures. They learned the value of every life, small or large, and how interconnected everything on the farm was. Seasonal awareness was critical. Children learned when to plant, harvest, or prepare for winter. They understood the rhythm of nature and its impact on survival. Missing a planting season could mean hunger. Timing wasn't a lesson in theory. It was experienced firsthand, year after year, season after season. By the time children became teenagers, they had absorbed a wide range of skills. They could plow, repair buildings, weave, cook, care for animals, and read the land. They had learned patience, resilience, cooperation, observation, humor, and creativity. They were ready to step into adult responsibilities. Even in work, there were moments of wonder. Watching the sunrise over frost-covered fields, listening to snow melt into streams, smelling bread baking, noticing the first shoots of barley, or hearing animals waking in the morning. These small moments taught appreciation. Children learned to notice beauty in the ordinary, to find joy even in hard work. Social lessons were just as important. Children watched adults negotiate trade, manage disputes, and cooperate on projects. They learned persuasion, patience, and respect. Leadership was observed, not taught in abstract words. Watching elders solve problems taught children how to navigate life and community. Ritual and religion also shaped education. Children helped prepare offerings to gods, attended seasonal ceremonies, and learned cultural stories. Small offerings of bread or milk were lessons in respect, humility, and mindfulness. These practices reinforced their connection to the land, family, and community. Even humor played a role in education. Mistakes were turned into stories. A goat knocking over a basket, a child spilling porridge, or a misstep in carrying firewood became lessons, laughter, and memory all in one. Humor softened life's hard edges, teaching resilience and perspective. Daily routines prepared children for adulthood. By participating in chores, crafts, cooking, animal care, observation, storytelling, and rituals, they became capable, skilled, and confident. Each mistake, joke, and shared meal added to their knowledge. Children weren't just helpers, they were future farmers, caretakers, and community members. They inherited skills, knowledge, and values from previous generations. They learned to survive, adapt, create, and appreciate life's beauty. Even without swords or ships, they were heroes in a quiet, essential way. The Viking farm was a living classroom. Every day offered lessons in work, observation, cooperation, resilience, humor, and care. Children absorbed the rhythms of the seasons, the behavior of animals, and the ways of the land. By the time they reached adulthood, they were fully prepared to continue the cycle of farm life. Through laughter, mistakes, and small victories, children learned the skills that would sustain them for life. They learned patience, creativity, responsibility, and the importance of family and community. They learned that life could be hard, but it could also be beautiful, playful, and full of small joys. Even now, imagining children running barefoot through mud, chasing chickens, carrying baskets, or listening to stories by the fire, we can feel the rhythm of their lives. They laughed, stumbled, learned, and grew in a world that demanded skill and rewarded care. They weren't warriors, but they were brave in ways that mattered just as much. Education on a Viking farm was slow, steady, and immersive. It was practical, social, creative, and spiritual. Every chore, story, and lesson prepared children to take their place in a world that demanded cooperation, skill, and resilience. Through it all, life on the farm continued, rich, alive, and deeply human. Chapter 7: Tools and Technology. Life on a Viking farm was built on tools. Simple, sturdy, and often handmade, they were the difference between survival and hardship. Every tool had a purpose, and every family member learned to use them carefully. Technology wasn't flashy, but it was practical, clever, and deeply connected to daily life. The plow was one of the most important tools. Wooden, reinforced with iron, it dug furrows for planting crops. Guiding it through rough, rocky soil required skill. A well-plowed field could produce enough grain to feed a family for months. A poorly plowed field could mean hunger. Children learned to guide small plows alongside older siblings or parents, gradually understanding how much pressure to apply and how to read the soil. Axes were everywhere, not just for chopping wood, but for building, repairing, and sometimes defense. Wood had to be gathered for fires, longhouses, fences, and tools. The sharp, heavy blade of an axe made quick work of logs, but using it safely required focus. A distracted moment could mean a deep cut. Still, axes were essential, trusted, and almost an extension of the farmer's arm. Sickles, knives, and small hand tools were used for harvesting crops, cutting herbs, and preparing food. They were simple yet indispensable. A small blade could mean efficiency in the garden or precision in preparing a meal. Children learned how to handle them safely, how to sharpen edges, and how to store them so they wouldn't get lost or cause accidents. Hammers, awls, and simple drills were used for repairing buildings, making furniture, and crafting everyday items. Blacksmiths in nearby villages often made iron components, but many repairs were done on the farm. Craftsmanship was essential. A poorly repaired door could let animals escape. A weak roof might collapse under winter snow. Every nail, peg, or joint mattered. Baskets, ropes, and containers were critical for storage. Woven from reeds or flexible branches, baskets held food, tools, and other essentials. Ropes made of hemp or animal hair tied bundles, lifted hay, or secured doors. The skill of weaving baskets and twisting ropes was taught from childhood. A well-made basket or strong rope could save time, effort, and sometimes food from spoiling. Water management was subtle but important. Small ditches, channels, or troughs ensured fields didn't flood and animals had clean drinking water. Irrigation wasn't complex, but it required observation and skill. Children learned to notice where water pooled or drained, how to adjust channels, and when to move animals to prevent muddy pens. Cooking tools reflected care and practicality. Large wooden spoons, clay pots, iron cauldrons over the fire, each had a purpose. A cauldron hung over the central hearth could boil water, cook grains, or simmer meat. Spatulas and knives were used to stir, cut, and serve. Tools were maintained with care. A cracked pot or dull knife could slow work or waste food. Storage technology was clever. Grain was stored in clay pots, baskets, or wooden bins, often raised from the ground to prevent pests. Smoked meat hung from beams, salted or dried to last months. Herbs and vegetables were preserved in simple ways that stretched supplies through winter. Viking farmers understood preservation as a combination of observation, experience, and creativity. Transportation tools included sleds, carts, and simple wagons. Moving hay, water, or firewood required ingenuity. Wheels were sometimes made of wood, axles carefully balanced. Heavy loads demanded teamwork. Children helped by pushing, carrying, or guiding animals pulling the sleds. Even small hands contributed to big tasks, teaching coordination, patience, and problem-solving. Farming tools were adapted to the seasons. Wooden rakes and hoes prepared soil in spring. Sickles and scythes harvested crops in summer and autumn. Winter brought maintenance, sharpening blades, repairing handles, checking joints. The rhythm of the tools matched the rhythm of life. Every season had its work, and every tool had its time. Technology wasn't just physical, it was knowledge passed down. Farmers understood the land, weather, and animals. They knew how to predict storms, when to plant or harvest, and how to store food. Tools amplified this knowledge. A plow was effective only when the soil and timing were understood. A cauldron cooked meals only when fire and water were managed correctly. Technology and knowledge were inseparable. Children learned tools by watching, imitating, and practicing. They learned caution, skill, and respect for sharp edges. Every hammer swing, every cut of a knife, every basket woven was a lesson. Mistakes were normal, often funny. A spilled bucket, a crooked weave, a bent nail, but they became stories and memories. Humor helped children remember and learn. Animals were also part of technology. Oxen, horses, and even dogs were tools for labor. Oxen pulled plows, horses carried loads, and dogs herded sheep. Caring for them meant understanding their strengths, moods, and limits. A farmer knew when to rest an animal, when to feed it, and how to use it efficiently. Children learned to read animals just as they read the land. Some tools were specialized. Fishing hooks, nets, and traps brought protein from rivers. Simple smelting and metalwork allowed repairs of blades and nails. Weaving looms produced cloth and sacks for storage. Each tool, each craft, added independence and security. Farmers weren't just laborers, they were inventors and problem solvers, adapting tools to every situation. Tools also reflected community and trade. Iron parts often came from blacksmiths miles away. Clay pots might be shaped locally or traded. Rope, baskets, and woven cloth connected farms to villages, markets, and even distant trade networks. A well-equipped farm showed skill, preparation, and connection to the wider world. Even without grand inventions, Viking tools were clever and efficient. They used what was available: wood, stone, iron, animal parts, and turned it into everything they needed. Every tool was maintained, every skill practiced, and every innovation passed down. Children learned, adapted, and eventually improved upon it. Humor and cleverness were part of technology. A tool might be repurposed creatively: an old plow for moving hay, a broken basket as a trap, a wooden spoon for stirring both porridge and dye. Innovation was practical. Mistakes could be amusing, yet often became solutions in disguise. The rhythm of life depended on tools. Plow in spring, sickle in summer, scythe in autumn, firewood and cauldron in winter. Every tool was used with care, maintained with attention, and taught to the next generation. Without tools, survival was impossible. With them, farmers shaped the land, nourished their families, and connected with their communities. Even today, imagining the smell of wood shavings, the clang of an axe, the scrape of a plow through soil, the warmth of a cauldron over fire, or the sound of a child learning to wield a small knife gives a sense of the world Viking farmers lived in. Tools weren't just objects. They were extensions of skill, patience, and daily life. Life on the Viking farm relied on simple, practical, clever tools. They were as much a part of the family as the animals, the fields, or the fire. They shaped work, education, survival, and even joy. And in the hands of men, women, and children, these tools told the story of a people who thrived quietly, patiently, and with cleverness that matched any hero on a battlefield. Chapter 8: Food and Farming. Life on a Viking farm revolved around food. Without crops, livestock, and clever preservation, survival would have been impossible. Farming wasn't just a job. It was a daily challenge, a rhythm dictated by the seasons, and a source of pride and creativity. Crops were the backbone of every farm. Barley, oats, and rye were staples, planted in neat rows in spring and harvested in late summer or early autumn. Fields were small, often carved out of forests or rocky soil, so every seed mattered. Farmers carefully prepared the soil, plowed with oxen, and sowed the grains. They knew which soil held warmth, which spots drained too slowly, and which areas needed extra care. Mistakes could mean hunger. Success meant food and trade. Vegetables were grown in tiny garden plots near the longhouse. Cabbage, onions, beans, and leeks provided flavor, nutrients, and variety. Herbs, parsley, thyme, wild garlic, added taste and medicine. Children helped plant and harvest, learning which vegetables thrived in different seasons and how to store them. Gardens weren't just for food. They were lessons in patience, observation, and responsibility. Fruits were rarer, but trees and bushes offered apples, berries, and wild fruits. Harvesting required timing. Pick too early and the fruit was sour. Pick too late and animals or birds might eat it first. Children chased fallen berries, tasted tart apples, and learned that nature's rewards came from care and attention. Humor was inevitable. Squished berries on hands, sneaky goats stealing fruit, or a child tripping over roots. Even small mishaps became stories and lessons. Livestock provided essential food and materials. Cows gave milk for porridge, cheese, and butter. Sheep provided wool, milk, and meat. Pigs offered meat, and chickens provided eggs. Farmers carefully fed and watched animals daily. Sick animals could mean weeks of lost food or income. Children learned to care for livestock, noticing subtle changes in behavior or appetite. A lowing cow, a restless pig, or a hen scratching furiously could tell a story if you knew how to read it. Meat wasn't just for immediate consumption. Smoking, salting, and drying were critical. Winter could last months, and fresh meat didn't keep. Hanging meat near the hearth for smoke, salting it in barrels, or drying it in cool, ventilated areas preserved it. These processes required skill and attention. Too little smoke and flies became a problem. Too much salt and the meat was ruined. Children learned to measure, watch, and smell, absorbing lessons that kept families fed through harsh months. Fishing supplemented the diet. Rivers, lakes, and coastal streams provided fish, which were fresh, salted, or smoked. Nets, traps, and lines were simple but effective tools. Fishing taught patience, observation, and timing. A fish jumping at the right moment meant a full meal. Missing it meant improvisation. Children learned to bait hooks, set nets, and recognize the best fishing spots. Every catch brought pride and food. Bread was a central part of meals. Made from barley, oats, or rye, it could be baked in a small clay oven or cooked on a flat stone over the fire. Baking was an art. Temperature, timing, and kneading all mattered. Children helped mix, knead, and shape dough. A slightly burnt loaf might inspire jokes, while a perfect loaf brought satisfaction and praise. Bread was daily sustenance, stored for weeks, and often shared with neighbors or travelers. Preservation extended to vegetables and herbs. Cabbage could be fermented, onions dried, and beans stored in cool, dry places. Farmers understood the balance of moisture, temperature, and time. Proper preservation meant survival through long, cold winters. Children learned that patience and careful observation were as important as hard work. Meals were simple but nourishing. Porridge thickened with milk or water, bread with butter or cheese, meat or fish when available, vegetables, and occasionally berries or honey. Every ingredient mattered. Waste was a luxury no family could afford. Seasonality defined farming and food. Spring was preparation, plowing, planting, repairing tools, feeding animals. Summer brought growth and constant care, watering gardens, tending animals, weeding crops. Autumn was harvest, grains cut and dried, vegetables stored, animals fattened for winter. Winter brought slow work, preservation, and reflection, repairing tools, mending clothes, preparing for the next cycle. Every season demanded awareness, skill, and patience. Trade and community also influenced food. Surplus grain, meat, butter, or cloth could be exchanged at local markets. Spices, honey, salt, or tools not produced on the farm might be acquired through barter. Even a small Viking farm was connected to a wider world, exchanging goods, knowledge, and culture. Children watched and sometimes participated, learning negotiation, fairness, and social interaction. Cooking and farming were intertwined with storytelling. Tales of clever farmers, resourceful women, or mischievous animals often arose during meals or harvest. Humor made work lighter. A goat knocking over a basket of potatoes, a child dropping a bucket of berries, or a sudden rainstorm washing away freshly planted seeds became stories that educated, entertained, and bonded the family. Technology enhanced farming. Plows, sickles, axes, and hand tools made work efficient. Storage methods preserved food. Simple irrigation and drainage channels protected fields. Children learned that survival depended on combining knowledge with tools. A farmer who understood soil, weather, animals, and plants could feed a family through the harshest winter. Knowledge, care, and clever tools worked together. Even with careful planning, failure was part of life. Crops could fail, animals get sick, storms could ruin fields. Humor, resilience, and problem-solving were essential. Children learned that setbacks were not the end. They were lessons. They learned to adapt, improvise, and continue. Survival demanded patience, observation, creativity, and a little luck. Life on the Viking farm was hard but rewarding. Food wasn't just fuel. It was proof of skill, cooperation, and foresight. Each meal told a story of effort, knowledge, and care. Children who learned farming, animal husbandry, cooking, and preservation grew into adults capable of maintaining the delicate balance of life. They understood the land, animals, tools, and seasons. They understood work, community, and resilience. Even in hardship, there was joy. Watching the first shoots of barley, smelling fresh bread baking, hearing animals stir in the morning, tasting the sweetness of berries, laughing at a clumsy goat. These small moments made life vibrant. Farming wasn't glamorous, but it was alive. And in this daily rhythm, the Viking farmer created life that was sustainable, meaningful, and deeply connected to nature. The rhythm of planting, tending, harvesting, preserving, and cooking tied the family, the land, and the community together. It was a cycle of life, full of learning, labor, laughter, and triumph. Survival depended on skill, observation, and careful planning. Every meal, every basket of grain, every preserved vegetable reflected knowledge passed down through generations. Even today, imagining the smell of fresh bread, the sound of oxen plowing, the sight of ripe cabbage, or the feel of soil in hands brings the Viking farm to life. Food and farming weren't just work. They were the story of resilience, cooperation, creativity, and daily heroism. Chapter 9. Winter Life and Festivals. Winter on a Viking farm was long, cold, and dark. Days were short, nights endless, and snow could cover the fields for weeks. Life slowed down, but it didn't stop. Survival depended on preparation, warmth, and clever planning. Winter tested everything a farmer had learned through the year: skill, patience, observation, and teamwork. Preparation began months before the first frost. Crops had to be harvested, animals fattened, firewood collected, and food preserved. Grain was stored in bins or clay pots, meat was smoked or salted, vegetables were dried or fermented, and dairy was turned into cheese or butter. Families worked together, making sure that no task was forgotten. Even children had duties: stacking firewood, checking on animals, or helping prepare winter stores. Once snow fell, the rhythm of life changed. Fields were covered, rivers froze, and paths became slippery. Travel was harder and isolation increased. Longhouses became the center of life, the place where work, warmth, meals, and storytelling all converged. The hearth, a constant source of heat and light, was the heart of the home. Its flames flickered across walls lined with tools, baskets, and the carefully preserved food of the season. Winter work focused on indoor tasks: repairing tools, mending clothing, weaving, and making simple household items kept everyone busy. Children learned new skills: spinning wool, repairing shoes, or helping with small wood projects. Every task had a purpose. Even seemingly small chores contributed to survival. The smell of wood smoke mixed with herbs drying near the fire, while the low hum of family conversations and laughter filled the air. Animals required special attention during winter. Sheep, cows, pigs, and chickens needed warmth, food, and care. Snow-covered pastures forced farmers to carry hay and water to the barns. Children helped, often slipping on icy ground or laughing as chickens pecked at their boots. These tasks taught observation and responsibility. A sick animal couldn't be ignored, and caring for livestock was a daily duty. Winter was also a time for storytelling. Nights were long, so families gathered near the fire to share tales. Stories of gods, ancestors, clever farmers, and brave women were passed down orally. Humor, exaggeration, and small lessons kept everyone entertained and taught values at the same time. A goat's mischief, a clumsy family member, or a trick played on a friend became part of the story, teaching patience, ingenuity, and observation. Festivals broke up the monotony of winter and brought light, warmth, and community. The most important was Yule, celebrated at the winter solstice. Families lit fires, decorated homes with evergreens, and offered small sacrifices to gods for protection, health, and a good harvest in the coming year. Food was abundant, spirits were high, and laughter echoed through the longhouse. Children looked forward to these festivals as times of magic, food, and fun. Other seasonal celebrations included midwinter gatherings, marking the changing moon and preparing for the coming spring. Music, dancing, feasts, and games were common. Farmers and their families exchanged small gifts, stories, and blessings. These festivals reinforced community bonds, reminding everyone that even in the harshest months, joy and connection were possible. Winter also meant reflection and planning. Farmers considered what had worked well in the past year, what crops thrived, which animals needed attention, and which tools required repair. Plans for spring were made while sitting near the fire, discussing strategy, timing, and responsibilities. Children listened and learned, absorbing practical knowledge and family wisdom. Even in idle moments, the mind worked, preparing for survival. Life in winter required resourcefulness. Firewood was precious. Coal, peat, and dried wood were rationed carefully. Smoke and warmth filled the longhouse, but the air could still be sharp and cold near doors or cracks in walls. Clothes were layered: woolen tunics, cloaks, mittens, and boots, to preserve heat. Comfort came from preparation, observation, and adaptability. Food became even more central in winter. Meals were warm, hearty, and designed to sustain energy. Porridge, soups, stews, preserved meat, cheese, and root vegetables filled the table. Herbs and spices were used sparingly, but thoughtfully. Children learned to appreciate every bite, understanding the work that went into growing, preparing, and storing it. Food wasn't just nourishment. It was a sign of skill, care, and family cohesion. Winter also encouraged creativity. With the fields resting, families could focus on crafts. Weaving, carving, making tools, or repairing household items occupied hours. Children practiced, sometimes failing humorously, and learned patience. Songs, games, and stories turned the long, dark nights into opportunities for learning, laughter, and imagination. Even in the harshest weather, humor and small joys were everywhere. A child slipping on ice, a goat wandering into the longhouse, or a snowball fight outside became shared moments of laughter. Humor softened winter's difficulty, built memory, and taught resilience. Families discovered that even the coldest, darkest months could hold warmth and joy. Winter also strengthened bonds. Families relied on one another, sharing work, food, and stories. Decisions were made together, from allocating firewood to planning for spring planting. Older children took responsibility for younger ones, and adults guided, instructed, and protected. Cooperation was survival. Every member contributed. Every small effort mattered. Stories told in winter were more than entertainment, they were education. Lessons about bravery, cleverness, generosity, and observation were embedded in tales. Humor made the lessons memorable. Children learned not only history but also values, problem-solving, and social skills. They learned to laugh at mistakes, improvise, and adapt to challenges. Winter festivals also celebrated connection to nature. Fires, evergreen decorations, and offerings reminded people of the cycles of the seasons, the rhythm of the land, and the importance of gratitude. Children participated, learning that survival depended not only on work but also on respect, observation, and cooperation. They experienced the magic of life intertwined with nature. By the end of winter, families were stronger, wiser, and more connected. Preparation, survival, and celebration had honed skills, built memory, and reinforced community. Children had learned resilience, responsibility, creativity, humor, and cooperation. Adults had reflected, repaired, and planned. The farm, though quiet under snow, was alive with life, care, and shared experience. Even now, imagining a longhouse lit by fire, filled with the smell of stew and smoke, children laughing as they try to reach for cookies or tumble into each other, animals stirring in their pens, and the snow outside glistening in moonlight, gives a sense of Viking winter life. Harsh, yes, but full of warmth, stories, laughter, and magic. Winter on a Viking farm was not a pause in life. It was a season of survival, learning, creativity, and joy, Festivals broke the monotony. Food sustained energy, tools and skills kept life going, and stories and humor filled the long nights. It was a time that shaped children into future farmers, nurtured community bonds, and reminded everyone that even in darkness, life could be rich, meaningful, and full of wonder. Chapter 10. Clothing and Textiles. Clothing on a Viking farm wasn't about fashion. It was about survival, comfort, and practicality. The cold winds, rain, and snow made good clothing essential. Every piece told a story of skill, resourcefulness, and the rhythm of daily life. Wool was the foundation. Sheep provided it, and families spun it into yarn, then wove it into cloth. The process was long and repetitive, but it taught patience and care. Children often helped with spinning or simple weaving tasks. Their fingers learned the rhythm of turning fibers into thread, then thread into usable fabric. Mistakes were common. A tangled skein or uneven weave, but these moments became lessons and stories, often with laughter. Linen, made from flax, was lighter and used for undergarments or summer clothes. It was softer than wool but required careful preparation. Flax had to be harvested, wet, and spun before it became thread. Then it was woven into shirts, dresses, or simple tunics. Linen was valued for its comfort and breathability, especially when worn under heavier layers. Clothing was layered. A wool tunic over linen provided warmth. Cloaks kept wind and rain off the body. Mittens, hats, and boots were made from wool or leather. Footwear had to withstand mud, snow, and long days in the fields. Everything was handmade, often repaired repeatedly, and carefully maintained. Even a small tear could make a day in winter miserable. Dyeing was subtle but common. Plants, roots, and berries provided colors. Onion skins produced yellows, lichens gave muted greens, and berries offered soft reds. Bright colors weren't the goal. Durability and natural beauty mattered more. Children sometimes helped with simple dyeing tasks, learning that the rhythm of soaking, stirring, and drying could transform plain fibers into vibrant material. Leather was another essential textile. Cow, goat, or deer hides were cleaned, stretched, and tanned. Leather made boots, belts, bags, and protective clothing. Tanning was tricky, involving smoke, water, and natural chemicals. Children might help soften hides or cut pieces for small projects. Leather was durable, often lasting years, and repairs were common. A patched boot or stitched belt was as normal as a well-worn sweater today. Sewing and mending were constant. Even strong fabrics wore out with daily work. Children learned to stitch, knot, and repair. Needles, often made from bone or metal, were small but essential tools. A loose seam could turn into a drafty tunic, or a ripped bag might spill grains. Attention to detail mattered. Mistakes were part of learning. An uneven stitch or crooked patch might earn laughter, but also valuable experience. Patterns and decorations were usually simple. Embroidery adorned cuffs, collars, or hems. Small geometric shapes, simple braids, or modest symbols showed skill and pride without being excessive. Children might practice on scraps, making mistakes, untangling threads, and learning patience. Humor often appeared here too. A crooked row of stitches or a playful symbol might make the family laugh, then correct it together. Textiles also reflected status and occupation. Farmers wore practical, muted tones, while wealthier families could afford more colorful cloth or finer embroidery. But even on a small farm, clothing was functional first. Durability, warmth, and comfort mattered more than style. Practicality shaped every choice, every layer, and every repair. Clothing was closely tied to the seasons. Heavy wool cloaks in winter, layered tunics in spring, lighter linen in summer, and protective layers in autumn. Hats, mittens, and boots were rotated, patched, and stored carefully. Even children learned this rhythm, understanding that clothing wasn't just personal, it was a tool for survival. Storage of textiles was careful and deliberate. Linen and wool were folded or rolled, kept dry and clean. Leather items were hung or stacked. Worms, moisture, or mold could destroy months of work. Children learned to inspect materials, repair minor damage, and appreciate the value of each piece. Clothes were precious, not disposable. Hats, mittens, and scarves were not only functional, they were playful. Children added small decorations, tassels, or patterns. Practicality met creativity. A crooked stitch on a mitten might become a family joke, or a playful tassel might mark a favorite hat. Humor was woven into life as naturally as thread into cloth. Working with textiles taught observation, patience, and dexterity. Spinning wool required steady hands. Weaving demanded attention to pattern and tension. Sewing and mending developed precision. Children learned these skills slowly, repeating motions until muscle memory made them automatic. Mistakes were normal and often funny, but part of the learning process. Clothing also reflected the environment. Thick wool kept cold winds out. Cloaks shielded from rain. Layered garments allowed freedom of movement while maintaining warmth. Boots needed traction for muddy paths and snow. Every stitch, every seam, every layer mattered. Children learned that survival depended not only on tools and knowledge but also on proper clothing. Festivals and celebrations allowed small bursts of creativity. Children might wear a new cloak, a brightly dyed scarf, or embroidered patterns to mark Yule or a local gathering. Special garments reflected care, skill, and pride, showing the family's effort in making life comfortable and beautiful, even in harsh winters. By the time children grew older, they were capable of managing their clothing and textiles independently. They could spin wool, weave fabric, mend torn garments, dye fibers, and create functional and occasionally decorative items. Clothing was no longer just protection. It was a reflection of skill, patience, and creativity. Even humor played a role. Crooked stitches, tangled yarn, or mismatched colors became family jokes, stories, or learning moments. Children learned resilience, patience, and problem-solving while laughing at themselves and each other. Clothing, like farming or cooking, was practical but also a source of connection and joy. In every garment there was a story. Wool from sheep tended by children, linen from flax harvested by parents, leather from animals fed and cared for over months, stitches repaired with patience and humor. Each piece reflected life on the farm. Clothing wasn't just fabric. It was survival, care, memory, and creativity all woven together. Even today, imagining a longhouse in winter, the smell of wool, the soft touch of linen, the rhythmic sound of spinning wheels, children threading needles, adults repairing cloaks by the fire, gives a sense of Viking life. Clothing wasn't just protection. It was a lesson, a story, and a tool. Viking textiles were clever, practical, and resilient. Children learned not only to wear them but to create, repair, and maintain them. In doing so, they learned patience, observation, and the importance of care in every small task. Through wool, linen, leather, and simple decorations, Viking children became capable, creative, and connected to the life of their farm, their family, and their community. Chapter 11. Social life and community. Life on a Viking farm wasn't just about work, it was about people. Family, neighbors, and the wider community shaped daily life, decisions, and celebrations. Social bonds were essential for survival, for sharing knowledge, and for finding joy in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable. The family was the heart of the farm. Everyone had roles, from tending fields to caring for animals, cooking, mending clothes, or spinning wool. Children weren't just helpers, they participated, learned, and contributed. Even small tasks mattered. Carrying water, feeding chickens, or gathering herbs taught responsibility and pride. Every member's work supported the others, creating a rhythm of cooperation that kept the household alive. Neighbors were more than acquaintances, they were an extended support network. Farms were often close together, and families helped one another during harvests, barn repairs, or emergencies. A fallen tree, a sick cow, or an unexpected storm could be handled quickly with neighborly assistance. Children watched these interactions and learned the importance of generosity, cooperation, and trust. Trades and bartering were central to social life. Surplus grain, butter, eggs, or woven textiles could be exchanged for iron, tools, salt, or other items not produced on the farm. Markets, though small and infrequent, were lively places. Children observed negotiation, fairness, and subtle strategy in action. They learned that value wasn't just about quantity, but quality, timing, and reputation. A clever trade could bring both resources and respect. Storytelling reinforced social bonds. Tales of gods, heroes, clever farmers, or mischievous animals were shared around the hearth or during work. Humor, exaggeration, and dramatization kept listeners engaged. Stories taught lessons about bravery, cleverness, cooperation, and morality. Children absorbed these lessons naturally, often repeating them later with their own twists. A clumsy goat or mischievous sibling could become part of a story, teaching observation, humor, and empathy. Community events were highlights of the year. Festivals, feasts, and seasonal gatherings brought families together. Music, dancing, and games were common. Children learned social skills through participation, cooperation in games, turn-taking, negotiation, and friendly rivalry. Humor was woven into social learning. A snowball fight at a midwinter gathering, a playful contest to carry hay, or a storytelling challenge became lessons in social interaction. Religion and ritual also structured community life. Offerings to gods, blessings for fields, and seasonal ceremonies reinforced shared beliefs and values. Children participated, learning the stories behind rituals and the reasons for practices. These activities were spiritual, social, and educational. They connected people, taught respect, and reinforced cooperation. Even small acts, like offering a pinch of grain or lighting a candle, became lessons in mindfulness and responsibility. Hospitality was important. Travelers, traders, or neighbors were often welcomed into longhouses. Food, warmth, and shelter were shared. Children observed the rituals of greeting, offering meals, and providing comfort. Social life depended on trust, reputation, and generosity. A family's honor was reflected not just in work, but in the way they treated others. Games and play were key social tools. Children played with sticks, stones, or small balls. Competitive activities like races or balancing contests built coordination and strategy. Teamwork was also emphasized. Children learned to cooperate, follow rules, and resolve conflicts. Humor played a role. Tripping over a stick, slipping on mud, or losing a race became shared laughter, teaching resilience and perspective. Marriages and family alliances were part of social life, too. Families observed relationships carefully, and children learned early about bonds, respect, and negotiation. Alliances strengthened trade, security, and cooperation between households. Children absorbed lessons about communication, compromise, and long-term planning through these networks. Work reinforced social bonds. Large tasks like harvesting, building, or repairing required teamwork. Neighbors shared tools, labor, and knowledge. Children participated, observing coordination, patience, and problem-solving. Humor and small mistakes lighten the work. A spilled basket of grain, a misaligned plank, or a clumsy helper might spark laughter, followed by a collective solution. These moments reinforced cooperation and memory. Music and storytelling were intertwined with social life. Singing while working, chanting while plowing, or telling a tale while cooking brought rhythm and connection. Children learned songs, remembered lines, and added their own humor or observations. Music and story weren't just entertainment. They were teaching, bonding, and memory-building tools. Conflict resolution was part of social education. Disputes over land, resources, or livestock could arise. Adults demonstrated negotiation, compromise, and mediation. Children watched carefully, learning that patience, reasoning, and fairness could prevent problems from escalating. Humor often defused tension. A playful joke or clever solution could resolve disagreements without anger. Social life depended on emotional intelligence as much as physical skill. Festivals reinforced social identity. Seasonal celebrations marked time, honored gods, and reminded people of their connection to the land and each other. Children learned community values, gratitude, generosity, observation, and resilience. Laughter, music, and shared meals strengthened bonds. These gatherings ensured that even the youngest felt part of the network of support, knowledge, and tradition. Even simple daily interactions built social knowledge. Sharing tools, helping a neighbor, or assisting a sibling taught empathy, patience, and cooperation. Humor, storytelling, and small competitions reinforced learning. Children observed adults, copied behaviors, and gradually understood how to navigate complex social networks. Social life was embedded in every task, story, and meal. By adolescence, children had internalized social norms, skills, and values. They knew how to help family, interact with neighbors, negotiate trades, participate in rituals, and join celebrations. Humor, creativity, and observation sharpened their abilities. They were ready to contribute meaningfully to community life, continuing the cycle of cooperation, learning, and survival. Even today, imagining children running between barns, sharing jokes during chores, listening to stories, playing games in the snow, or helping neighbors brings Viking social life to life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential, joyful, and full of learning. The longhouse, the fields, and the gatherings were classrooms, playgrounds, and theaters all in one. Social life on a Viking farm blended work, education, humor, and ritual. Family, neighbors, and community shaped survival, knowledge, and memory. Children learned empathy, cooperation, observation, creativity, and resilience. Humor made lessons memorable. Storytelling preserved history. Festivals strengthened bonds. Everyday work connected everyone. In this network, Viking children grew into capable, thoughtful, and connected adults, ready to maintain life on the farm and contribute to the community. Chapter 12: Travel and Trade. Life on a Viking farm was mostly local, but travel and trade opened a window to a wider world. Even farmers who rarely fought in battles still had connections beyond their fields, rivers, and forests. Trading brought resources, stories, and small adventures, shaping both daily life and the imagination. Journeys required planning. Farmers didn't travel lightly. Wagons, sleds, or boats carried goods depending on the terrain. A wagon might be loaded with butter, cheese, grains, or while heading to a nearby village. Boats, sometimes small wooden ones, transported furs, fish, or salted meat along rivers or coasts. Travel wasn't simple. It demanded skill, patience, and awareness. Children often helped with small tasks, learning how to pack, navigate, or manage animals. Even simple mistakes, like dropping a basket or letting a goat wander onto the path, became memorable lessons. Markets were hubs of life and trade. Villages gathered weekly or seasonally, exchanging goods and news. Surplus crops, preserved meat, dairy, or textiles could be traded for iron tools, salt, or rare spices. Timing was critical. Arrive too early, and supplies weren't ready. Too late, and the best goods were gone. Children learned negotiation by observing parents, when to offer, when to pause, and when to accept. They discovered that value was not just quantity, but quality, presentation, and reputation. A clever trade brought both resources and respect. Trade was not just practical, it was social. Along with goods came news, gossip, and stories. A traveling trader might bring tales of faraway cities, strange customs, or clever inventions. Children listened wide-eyed, imagining distant places. Humor often accompanied these stories. A clumsy trader, a stubborn horse, or a misheard instruction could become part of a tale retold for years. These stories sparked imagination and taught practical lessons about travel, caution, and observation. Longer journeys were rare, but they did happen. Farmers sometimes traveled to larger towns for markets, festivals, or urgent needs. Trips could take days or weeks, depending on distance and weather. Planning was essential. Provisions, tools, clothing, and knowledge of the route determined success. Children traveling with adults learned to observe, follow, and anticipate challenges. Even small responsibilities, like carrying supplies or watching animals, prepared them for future journeys. Waterways were vital for trade and travel. Rivers and coastal routes allowed faster movement than walking. Boats, though simple, were clever and sturdy. They could carry heavy loads and navigate currents, rapids, and tides. Skills like rowing, navigating, and reading water were learned early. Children sometimes helped pull boats onto shore, untangle nets, or stack goods safely. These small tasks gave a sense of rhythm, timing, and responsibility. Travel exposed families to new foods, tools, and ideas. Grain, salt, fish, furs, iron, or even small luxuries could be exchanged. Items not found on the farm became treasures. Children saw how new tools made work easier, how spices transformed food, or how fabrics differed from home cloth. Curiosity was nurtured. Observation and experimentation followed. A child noticing a clever plow or a new way of preserving meat could bring ideas back home, improving life on the farm. Community and relationships mattered in trade. Farmers trusted neighbors and distant families to keep agreements, share information, and provide assistance if needed. Children watched carefully. They learned that reputation, honesty, and fairness were as important as skill or strength. A misstep in a trade could lead to lost goods, embarrassment, or tension, while cleverness, humor, and respect built trust and friendship. Markets were also places of learning and entertainment. Songs, jokes, and storytelling were common. Children picked up tales, tricks, and songs. Humor and observation were lessons in disguise. A cart tipped over, a spilled basket of berries, or a horse refusing to move might create laughter, teach patience, and sharpen problem-solving skills. Even small mishaps became part of community memory. Trade fostered creativity. Farmers experimented with bartering, measuring, and crafting. Children learned numbers, weighing, and estimating. They observed patterns, made comparisons, and tested ideas. A clever solution, like bundling smaller items to match a trader's offer, taught ingenuity. Humor often made the lesson memorable. A child who miscounted coins or spilled seeds became a story retold for amusement and education. Journeys weren't without risk. Roads could be muddy, icy, or blocked by fallen trees. Rivers had rapids and unpredictable currents. Storms could delay travel or damage goods. Children learned observation, adaptability, and resilience. They saw adults make quick decisions, adjust routes, or protect cargo. Humor softened the stress. A goat wandering into a wagon or a spilled sack of grain became shared laughter instead of frustration. Seasonal travel shaped rhythm. Spring and summer were busiest, with grain, wool, and dairy products ready for trade. Autumn often focused on preserved food and preparations for winter. Winter journeys were rare, usually limited to emergencies, as frozen ground and short days made travel challenging. Children learned that timing mattered as much as planning, and patience was as valuable as speed. Trade also strengthened social networks. Farmers and their families maintained connections, exchanged advice, and supported one another. Children saw firsthand that survival wasn't only about physical skill or knowledge. It was about relationships, observation, and cooperation. A strong network could mean the difference between a successful harvest and hardship. Even the smallest items told stories. A piece of cloth, a rare spice, a tool from another village carried memory, skill, and connection. Children learned to appreciate both utility and meaning. Items weren't just objects. They were lessons in creativity, negotiation, and human connection. By adolescence, children often participated actively in trade. They helped measure, carry, negotiate, and observe. Skills in observation, humor, timing, and careful decision-making prepared them for adult responsibilities. Trade taught lessons in practical survival, creativity, and social intelligence, all while connecting them to a wider world. Even today, imagining children traveling with parents, carrying baskets, rowing small boats, observing markets, learning the rhythm of negotiation, laughing at small mistakes, brings Viking trade to life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential, exciting, and filled with lessons that shaped skills, social bonds, and imagination. Travel and trade were more than movement and exchange. They were education, storytelling, creativity, and humor. Farmers connected their homes to the wider world, bringing resources, ideas, and joy. Children grew into capable, observant, and clever adults, ready to maintain the farm, participate in community, and continue the cycle of learning, humor, and survival. Chapter 13. Religion and Beliefs. Religion and beliefs were woven into every aspect of life on a Viking farm. It wasn't just about gods or rituals. It shaped work, family, festivals, and how people understood the world. Even children absorbed lessons about respect, observation, and responsibility through these practices. Vikings believed in a pantheon of gods and spirits, each connected to nature, luck, and human behavior. Odin was wise and mysterious, Thor strong and protective, Freya associated with love and fertility, and smaller spirits guarded the home, fields, and animals. These beliefs weren't abstract, they influenced daily life. Farmers offered small gifts, prayers, or rituals before planting, harvesting, or moving animals. Children watched closely, learning that care, observation, and respect for forces beyond their control could guide survival. The hearth was sacred. Fire wasn't only warmth and light. It symbolized life and protection. Families made offerings near the hearth. A pinch of grain, a bit of butter, or a small crafted item. Smoke spiraling toward the roof seemed to carry prayers. Children often helped, sometimes with small, clumsy hands, learning that intention mattered more than perfection. Humor often appeared. A dropped offering, a mischievous cat stealing herbs, or a child accidentally tossing a spoon into the fire. Even these small mishaps became part of memory and storytelling. Seasonal festivals marked key points in the agricultural year. Yule, at the winter solstice, was the most important. Homes were decorated with evergreens, fires were lit, and families offered small sacrifices to gods for protection and future harvests. Children loved Yule for the warmth, food, and stories, often imagining gods and spirits as friendly or mischievous figures who might peek into the longhouse. Laughter, food, and ritual intertwined. Other festivals celebrated planting, harvest, and the changing moon. Midwinter, spring, and summer gatherings reinforced community and spirituality. Families sang songs, told stories, and performed small rituals together. Children learned the rhythm of nature, the importance of timing, and the connection between human effort and forces beyond their control. These rituals taught patience, observation, and the value of cooperation. Sacred sites existed beyond the farm. Woods, rivers, hills, or stone markers could be places of offering or reflection. Travelers sometimes left small gifts, such as stones, coins, or crafted objects, to honor spirits or gods. Children learned to recognize these sites and the respect required, understanding that some places carried meaning beyond the ordinary. Humor occasionally surfaced. A child attempting to mimic an offering, a goat knocking over a small pile of stones, but lessons were still absorbed. Divination and prophecy were part of daily life. Farmers and families sometimes observed natural signs, patterns in clouds, behavior of animals, or movement of stars to predict weather, luck, or harvest success. Children were curious, often asking endless questions about why a crow flew a certain way or why frost appeared in one field but not another. Adults answered carefully, teaching observation, interpretation, and critical thinking. Even small mistakes in reading signs became funny stories, reinforcing learning. Magic, charms, and talismans existed alongside gods and rituals. Small carved figures, stones, or amulets were believed to offer protection. Children often carried tiny charms, sometimes decorating them with personal touches. Humor and creativity were part of this practice. A charm might be slightly crooked, brightly painted, or silly-looking, but it still held meaning and taught belief, care, and imagination. Sacred stories guided moral understanding. Tales of gods, heroes, clever farmers, or mischievous spirits conveyed lessons about courage, wisdom, fairness, and cooperation. Children absorbed these lessons naturally. Humor and exaggeration made the stories memorable. A trickster spirit outwitted a giant, a clever farmer fooled a neighbor, or a mischievous animal caused chaos. Even small stories reinforced observation, empathy, and problem-solving skills. Rituals also reinforced social bonds. Families, neighbors, and travelers participated together. Sharing food, songs, and prayers strengthened connections. Children learned that religion wasn't only about belief. It was about community, cooperation, and respect. Even jokes, playful mistakes, or teasing during rituals were part of learning social norms. Humor made lessons stick. Seasonal sacrifices had practical elements, too. Offerings might ensure a successful harvest, healthy livestock, or safety during travel. Children saw that action, care, and respect complemented belief. For example, preparing offerings carefully, feeding animals properly, and observing the environment were all intertwined with faith. Practical work and spiritual attention were inseparable, teaching responsibility in both mundane and sacred tasks. Death and ancestors were central to belief. Families honored the dead with small offerings, memorial stones, or stories. Children learned that life was part of a cycle, and that respect for those who came before was essential. Humor could appear even here, a playful memory of a mischievous grandfather or an exaggerated tale of a great-aunt's clever trick, but reverence remained. Stories and humor together taught memory, values, and social continuity. Daily life reflected these beliefs. Before planting, children observed adults offering a small token to the gods or spirits. Before eating, they might make a tiny gesture of thanks. Even chores like fetching water or feeding animals carried awareness of unseen forces. Children learned mindfulness, respect, and observation, blending work and belief naturally. Religion and beliefs connected the farm to a larger world. The gods, spirits, and ancestors were reminders that human effort mattered, but could not control everything. Observation, skill, humor, and cooperation complemented faith. Children learned that careful work, respect for nature, and playful curiosity were all parts of survival. By adolescence, children had absorbed the rhythm of belief. They could participate in rituals, understand stories, respect sacred spaces, and integrate lessons from humor, observation, and social guidance. Spiritual life was intertwined with practical life. They understood that gods, ancestors, and spirits guided, protected, and taught lessons, but action and care were still essential. Even today, imagining a longhouse lit by fire, the smell of herbs and smoke filling the air, children placing small offerings, laughing at tiny mishaps, and listening to elders recount divine or mischievous tales brings Viking belief to life. It wasn't abstract. It was sensory, practical, playful, and deeply human. Religion and beliefs shaped work, festivals, stories, and family life. Humor and observation made lessons memorable. Offerings and rituals tied families to land, community, and ancestors. Through these practices, children learned responsibility, patience, empathy, and creativity. Belief wasn't separate from life, it was life. On a Viking farm, gods and spirits were companions in daily tasks, guides in decision-making, and sources of wonder. Children grew up learning that work, observation, humor, cooperation, and faith were all threads in a single tapestry. Life, even in its hardships, was full of stories, lessons, and small miracles waiting to be noticed, honored, and laughed about. Chapter 14, Arts, Music, and Storytelling. Life on a Viking farm wasn't just work and survival, it was also art, music, and stories. Even children learned early that creativity was part of life, woven into chores, play, and family gatherings. These skills weren't for galleries or concerts. They were practical, playful, and magical in their own way. Storytelling was central. Around the hearth, after a long day of work, families gathered. The fire crackled, smoke curled toward the roof, and shadows danced on walls lined with tools, baskets, and preserved foods. Elders shared tales of gods, heroes, clever farmers, and mischievous animals. Humor, exaggeration, and surprises kept listeners wide-eyed and entertained. Children learned lessons without feeling like they were being taught. Bravery, cleverness, patience, and kindness were wrapped in laughter and suspense. Even chores became opportunities for storytelling. While carrying water, feeding animals, or stacking hay, children and adults shared short tales or jokes. A clumsy goat, a spilled basket of grain, or a runaway chicken could spark a story, often exaggerated into humor and legend. These moments built memory, social connection, and observation skills. Every funny incident became a story worth retelling. Music filled the longhouse, too. Singing while spinning wool, chanting during plowing, or drumming on simple wooden instruments created rhythm and joy. Music wasn't performance, it was part of the flow of life. Children learned tunes by ear, joined in clapping, or tried small instruments. Mistakes were laughed at, celebrated, and corrected gently. Humor and repetition made learning natural and fun. Carving and decoration were common forms of art. Tools, furniture, household items, and even weapons were often adorned with simple patterns, runes, or playful designs. Children practiced on scraps of wood, learning hand-eye coordination, patience, and creativity. A crooked rune, a wobbly animal, or an accidentally funny pattern often became family jokes, remembered and laughed about for years. Art was practical and personal, functional and beautiful. Textiles and embroidery were other forms of artistic expression. Patterns on cuffs, collars, or hems were often geometric or symbolic. Children learned by helping with small stitches, making mistakes, and experimenting with colors. Humor and creativity went hand in hand. A slightly crooked stitch or a bright, mismatched color might become a favorite decoration. Every piece told a story, reflected skill, and held meaning. Music, storytelling, and art were not separate from work. They complemented it. Rhythm helped in repetitive tasks like weaving, churning butter, or rowing boats. Stories entertained and taught lessons while chores were done. Humor, observation, and imagination sharpened problem-solving skills. Children absorbed these lessons naturally, understanding that life, work, and creativity were interconnected. Community gatherings amplified the role of arts. Festivals, feasts, and seasonal celebrations featured songs, storytelling contests, and performances. Families demonstrated skills, children competed in playful challenges, and neighbors cheered and laughed. Humor was key. Playful exaggeration, funny faces, or small pranks made the event lively. Children learned social cues, timing, and creativity while participating. Instruments were simple but effective. Wooden flutes, small drums, or rattles made music accessible. Children experimented with sounds, rhythms, and melodies. Mistakes were part of learning, often leading to laughter or creative solutions. Music taught timing, cooperation, and improvisation. Even small performances reinforced observation, memory, and social engagement. Poetry and rhyme were embedded in storytelling. Skalds and storytellers recited tales that were rhythmic and easy to remember. Children absorbed patterns, language, and memory skills naturally. Humor often punctuated the verses, ensuring stories were enjoyable, memorable, and full of practical lessons. A clever twist, a funny animal, or a playful exaggeration made the moral stick. Carving, weaving, and music also served practical purposes. Patterns in textiles identified families or farm roles. Carvings on tools marked ownership or guided use. Songs reminded children of work rhythms or seasonal tasks. Artistic expression was woven into life seamlessly. Children learned that skill, observation, and creativity weren't just decoration. They were part of survival, memory, and community. Humor and playful mistakes were everywhere in art. A misaligned stitch, a crooked carving, or a silly melody might become a cherished family joke. These small moments of laughter built confidence, resilience, and imagination. Children learned that perfection wasn't required, effort and intention mattered more, and mistakes could be celebrated. Storytelling preserved history, Tales of ancestors, heroic deeds, or clever farmers connected children to the past. They learned about family, survival strategies, social norms, and humor. Repetition and performance made stories memorable. Children often added their own embellishments, improvising and learning creativity, observation, and audience awareness. Even daily objects held artistry. Bowls, spoons, tools, and containers were decorated subtly. Children helped carve small patterns, learning hand-eye coordination, patience, and pride in work. Humor appeared. A tiny animal carved awkwardly, a rune accidentally reversed. But these mistakes were remembered fondly and became part of family lore. Through arts, music, and storytelling, Viking children developed patience, observation, memory, creativity, and humor. They learned social cues, timing, cooperation, and resilience. Lessons were embedded in laughter, play, and hands-on experience. Children grew capable, confident, and imaginative while contributing to family life. Even imagining a longhouse today, the smell of wood smoke, the sound of a drum or flute, children laughing while carving or stitching, elders telling tales, songs echoing, and playful mishaps, brings Viking life to sensory life. Art wasn't separate from life. It was life itself, wrapped in rhythm, humor, and meaning. On a Viking farm, arts, music, and storytelling weren't hobbies. They were survival, education, and joy. Children learned through participation, observation, and playful mistakes. Humor made lessons memorable. Rhythm and creativity supported work. Stories connected past, present, and future. Arts enriched life, strengthened bonds, and sparked imagination. Life without arts and stories would have been colder and quieter. Music and storytelling brought warmth, laughter, and learning. Carving and weaving gave pride, skill, and creative expression. Children learned that effort, imagination, and humor were as essential as food, clothing, and shelter. In every stitch, note, and tale, Viking life became alive, playful, and meaningful. Chapter 15: Legacy and Lessons. The life of a Viking farmer may seem quiet compared to tales of warriors or explorers, but it was just as full of adventure, challenge, and meaning. Farms were places of survival, learning, and growth. Every child who grew up on a farm absorbed lessons from daily life, work, family, humor, and community. These lessons became their legacy, shaping the next generation and keeping traditions alive. Legacy on a Viking farm wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about skill, memory, and shared experience. Children inherited tools, clothing, and land, but also knowledge. How to plow a field, weave a woolen blanket, preserve food, mend clothes, and care for animals. Each skill represented months of practice, observation, and even mistakes. Parents guided hands, corrected errors, and celebrated small victories. Humor softened lessons. Spilled milk, crooked stitches, or a runaway goat became part of learning, remembered fondly for years. The rhythm of farm life was itself education. Children learned to read the weather, notice animal behavior, and sense when crops were ready. Every chore carried a lesson in patience, timing, and attention. Playful mistakes, a child slipping in mud, a goat toppling a basket, became memorable teaching moments. Laughter and learning went hand in hand, shaping resilience and perspective. Food and farming were central to legacy. Children learned planting, harvesting, storing, and preserving crops. Dairy, meat, and vegetables required care. Every preserved grain or salted fish represented months of preparation. Passing down these skills ensured survival and taught foresight. Humor appeared in daily life. A pig chasing a child, a milk pail tipping over, everyone laughing while solving problems together. Children learned that work and play could coexist. Clothing and textiles were another inherited skill. Spinning wool, weaving, sewing, and mending passed from parent to child. Every stitch carried utility and history. Children learned patience and precision, while playful mistakes, Crooked seams or bright, mismatched colors added humor and memory. Textile work taught creativity, observation, and pride. Animals were living teachers. Feeding, milking, and caring for cows, sheep, pigs, and chickens taught responsibility and empathy. Children learned to detect illness, observe behavior, and anticipate needs. Humor often entered lessons, a stubborn goat or wandering chicken, but observation and care were never forgotten. These experiences built patience, problem-solving, and respect for life. Community-shaped legacy, too. Cooperation with neighbors, participation in festivals, and support during emergencies taught social skills, trust, and collaboration. Children saw adults negotiate, resolve conflicts, and share resources. Stories, songs, and humor reinforced social norms. A miscounted trade, a playful prank, or an exaggerated tale became part of shared memory, teaching lessons in an enjoyable way. Storytelling itself preserved knowledge. Tales of ancestors, clever farmers, and mischievous spirits carried morals, cleverness, courage, and humor. Children absorbed these lessons naturally. Humor and exaggeration made stories memorable. A mischievous goat, a clumsy elder, or a clever twist became part of family lore. Storytelling connected past, present, and future, ensuring traditions lived on. Religion and belief carried practical lessons. Rituals, offerings, and festivals reinforced respect for nature, the seasons, and community. Children learned that effort, attention, and mindfulness were as important as faith. Humor and curiosity were encouraged. Even spilled offerings or clumsy gestures became funny, memorable moments. These practices taught that survival and meaning were intertwined with respect and observation. Arts and music were a living legacy. Songs, instruments, carvings, embroidery, and decorated tools carried lessons, memory, and personal expression. Children learned through practice, repetition, and gentle correction. Mistakes were celebrated with laughter, creating both memory and skill. Music reinforced rhythm in work and social interaction. Carvings and textiles carried identity and pride. Creativity shaped the farm's environment, family identity, and confidence. Humor was woven through every lesson. Viking children learned that life was full of small disasters and mistakes, and laughter made challenges easier. A goat toppling eggs, spilled milk, or a crooked stitch became stories, teaching resilience, problem-solving, and perspective. Humor made lessons stick and life more enjoyable. Education on a farm wasn't formal, but it was complete. Children learned practical skills, social skills, moral lessons, creativity, patience, and humor through observation, participation, and reflection. Every chore, story, festival, or joke was a teaching moment. Mistakes became opportunities, play was learning, and joy was embedded in everyday life. By adolescence, children were capable and confident. They could care for animals, cultivate fields, preserve food, make clothing, repair tools, navigate social networks, participate in festivals, tell stories, and contribute to family and community. Lessons of childhood prepared them for adulthood. Skills, humor, and observation were their inheritance, alongside tools and land. Legacy wasn't just survival, it was continuity. Every story told, stitch sewn, tool repaired, meal prepared, and joke shared contributed to the next generation. Families passed down knowledge, values, and memory, ensuring the rhythm of life continued. Children became custodians of history, culture, and practical wisdom. Humor, creativity, and resilience traveled alongside essential survival skills. Even today, imagining a longhouse, the smell of smoked meat and herbs, children playing with goats, weaving scraps, listening to elders tell stories, songs echoing, laughter punctuating lessons, brings Viking legacy to life. Life on the farm was practical, playful, and deeply human. Each child absorbed survival, humor, and creativity, carrying it forward. The legacy of a Viking farmer is subtle but profound. It's not in battles or conquest. It's in observation, patience, and practical knowledge. is in how children learn to care, laugh, create, and think. The rhythm of daily chores, warmth of the hearth, and stories shared left a lasting impression. Farming, caring, creating, laughing, and learning. These were the true treasures. Viking farmers may not have wielded swords in legend, but they cultivated life itself. Fields, animals, homes, families, knowledge, stories, and laughter. Every task, joke, and lesson became a thread in the fabric of legacy. Children carried these threads forward, ensuring that even in harsh winters or small farms, the essence of Viking life endured. Life on a Viking farm was full of work, care, play, humor, creativity, stories, and observation. Legacy wasn't gold. It was knowledge, skill, memory, laughter, and imagination. Children grew into capable, thoughtful, and creative adults, ready to continue the rhythm of farm life, preserve tradition, and carry forward the humor, stories, and lessons learned from hearth to field, from one generation to the next. Even as the longhouse grows quiet, the fire dims, and children drift to sleep, the lessons remain, subtle, enduring, and woven into life itself. Farming, caring, creating, laughing, and learning. These were the true treasures of the Viking farm, a legacy that survived through work, play, and stories, ready to inspire every future generation.